Okay, welcome back to this full Excel eSports tutorial course. This is the last fundamentals video before we get into the real meat of the course, and this is going to be a quick one on error handling, so let's get to it. There are three things we're going to cover in this video. First of all is how to get rid of errors, what to do if you have errors but don't want them. Secondly, how to find errors and debug your formulas. And then thirdly, when you actually do want to have errors and why that might be. So first of all, let's take this wine data here and just do an XLOOKUP to find out what the acidity is. So XLOOKUP the wine in here and give me the acidity. So we'll notice the last wine has an error. So what do we do when we have an error? Because, for example, in this case, this is not here. So some formulas have this if not found option. So for that, you can put in what you want. So let's say 0, or we could put not found, or whatever else. For formulas that don't have that, you want to wrap the whole thing in an if error. So if error, comma, and then what you want if there's an error. So a 0, for example. That formula will then apply to all of them and work just fine. Now, one word of caution, when you're using the error checking within a formula, for example, this XLOOKUP one, it can sometimes give you errors when you're doing stuff like looking into arrays and changing this to be kind of another XLOOKUP and so on and so on. It works in this simple case, but there is one to watch out for. It's generally safer just to wrap everything in the if error method rather than using these internal formula versions. So that's basically the two ways to get rid of errors. Now let's talk about finding errors. So we have a bit of a more complex formula here. We're looking up a wine and an attribute with an index match, so 2D lookup, and we've covered this in one of the earlier videos. Let's say we have a formula, it's not quite working and we don't know why, and we need to check each step of the formula. There's a couple of things we can use built into Excel in this formulas tab. So first of all, we have the trace precedence. So that's going to point with an arrow into everything that drives that formula. So we can see it's driven from this table and these two inputs. We can also go the other way. So this one we can say trace dependence is saying this cell is dependent on what this cell says. Sometimes useful, I don't use them very much. One that's more useful is this evaluate formula box. So if you come into this, it will underline what it's going to evaluate, and you can step through the formula. So it's going to look at B12. I can see that's this weak num Zinfandel. Okay, weak num Zinfandel. Then it's going to X match that into my list, give me 96. Then it's going to do the next one, so X match body. So I can step through the formula to simplify it down to see what parts are being evaluated first or last to get to the answer. Another way to do this in, I would say, a bit more detail is that you can just highlight any part of your formula, hover over it with the cursor, and it will show you what that is evaluating to. So I can see step by step parts of the formula here, and if anything results in an error, we'd be able to see that. So for example, if I had a bracket in the wrong place here, and I had an error, okay, I don't know why my formula is coming to an error. Let's evaluate it. Up here, I can see which parts are causing the error. So I could see, okay, it's this part, something is obviously wrong, what have I done? Okay, I've put a bracket in the wrong place. And then final trick with finding out where your errors are is in the formula bar, you can actually use this little helper box to click parts of the formula so you can see where each part is. So I can see that's my array, that's my row number, that's my column number. And this helps massively when figuring out where brackets are. So an extreme example is this giant lambda I've built. So when I was building this, I would often mess up where brackets are. So to figure out where they are, I would click here, for example. So I'm in my if statement, so I can see if that's true, this is my value if true, this is my value if error. I could click this lambda to check that through all my parameters. So I get my parameters like that, and then eventually I would get down to my calculation, which is this whole part, and I can see all the brackets are right and finishing there. Same with this let, I could just click each name, what each formula is, and go through it one step by step, and I find that really useful to actually debug formulas where brackets are, where commas are, and stuff like that. Final part of this video is where you actually want errors. So that sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes it's true, and I will show you an example of why. So let's say we wanted to find all wines that have an acidity value of 92. Now in most cases you'd use the filter function, but I'm going to show you a different way just to highlight my point. So I'm going to say if this equals 92, give me this. And I will get a full list spelled out, the same size of this, because we're in an array formula here, and anything that matches my criteria will give me the answer. So how do I get rid of these falses? Well, that's pretty annoying, but there is a trick in how to do this. So I could say my value, if an error, is NA. So I can type NA, open and close brackets, and that will then force an error instead of a false value. I'm saying if it's false, give me this instead, an error. And then we can wrap that in 2col and actually use the ignore errors argument, so 2 or 3 to ignore blanks and errors, and we'll have a filtered list there. Now that's actually a slow way because there's a quicker version of that. So instead of using if, then if you use the ifs formula with an s on the end, when something is not found, instead of resulting to a false, it will result to an error. So we can use the ifs version instead, and then use a 2 col, comma 3 to get rid of those errors. Now, knowing when to use this is quite tricky, but I actually do use it quite a lot. In a lot of my lambdas here, I'll have kind of this ifs argument because I want things to spill to an error, so I can then say 2 col 3 to get rid of the errors. In this lambda, I actually use another trick, which is h-stacking 2 arrays. So if I say h-stack this with this, because they're not the same size, I'm going to get an NA where everything is. So I could expand all the ones down here and then h-stack 2 arrays which are the same size, or I could just say if error or if NA. I normally just use if error because it covers all scenarios. Then give me this thing anyway, and then I'm able to stack 2 arrays that are different sizes and repeat the first value. So plenty of tricks there you can do with errors. A short video, but hopefully that just gives you a few extra ideas. So next time we're here, we're going to go into the actual kind of esports specific stuff of the questions they might ask you in data cases and how to work with all the types of data you might be given and some common questions that come up and tricks of how to solve them. So those videos I think will be the most useful if you are planning on competing in Excel esports. Still, of course, useful to anyone that just uses Excel, but I'm looking forward to getting into a new chapter, so subscribe and hopefully I will see you then.